In 1967, somewhere along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a North Vietnamese patrol recovers a submachine gun from the wreckage of a firefight. It is not American. It is not Russian. It is German. Built in 1943 for a war that had ended more than 20 years earlier and for an army that no longer existed. Now, how does a weapon built for the Third Reich end up in the hands of America's most secret soldiers, deep inside a country the United States swore it had never entered? You have probably heard the rumor that MACV-SOG raided museums for their weapons, that these men carried Nazi guns as war trophies, or simply because they thought they looked cool. It is a great story, and you can see why it spreads. It has Nazis in it. It has elite commandos in it. It sounds like a secret nobody ever taught you. So it gets repeated on forums, in comment sections, and by 100 faceless channels that ran with the most dramatic version and never checked a single source. The image sticks in your head. A Green Beret creeping through the jungle with a captured German submachine gun, just because he liked the look of it. And almost all of it is wrong. The truth is far more calculated. And it starts not in the jungle, but in Washington. Those weapons were chosen because of a single, chilling question that planners in Washington had thought very carefully about. What happens if one of these men is killed in a place he is not supposed to be, and his weapon is recovered by the enemy? Answering that question shaped one of the most secretive weapons policies in American military history. This is the story of why the United States sent its most elite soldiers to war, carrying the guns of its oldest enemies. To understand the weapons, you first have to understand the unit. And officially, the unit did not exist. On January 24th, 1964, the Joint Chiefs of Staff created something called the Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. The name was deliberately boring. Studies and Observations Group. It sounds like a team of analysts with clipboards. It was nothing of the sort. MACV-SOG was a joint top-secret special operations task force. And here's the first strange detail. On paper, it answered to the commander in Vietnam, General William Westmoreland. In reality, it was run from the Pentagon by an office called the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities. Why the strange chain of command? Because Westmoreland had no authority to do what SOG was built to do. SOG's job was to fight the war that America publicly denied it was fighting. The North Vietnamese army was moving men and supplies south through supposedly neutral Laos and Cambodia. Hanoi denied those troops were there, and because of a 1962 international agreement that declared Laos neutral, the United States denied it was operating there too. So both sides lied, and into that lie walked SOG. The first cross-border mission launched on October 18, 1965. A recon team codenamed Iowa went 15 miles into Laos to hit a suspected enemy truck stop. It was the opening move of an operation called Shining Brass, later renamed Prairie Fire. That first mission also cost them a man, Captain Larry Thorne, killed when his helicopter went down in the dark. Operations into Cambodia would follow under their own codenames, Daniel Boone, later Salem House. And the secrecy ran so deep that even a U.S. ambassador got a say in the fighting. In Laos, Ambassador William Sullivan personally controlled how deep the teams could go and how long they could stay. The soldiers had a nickname for him, the Field Marshal. Their teams were tiny, usually 2 or 3 Americans leading a handful of indigenous fighters, Montagnard, Nung, or Vietnamese. They would cross the border on foot into areas swarming with an enemy that outnumbered them by hundreds to one. Whole North Vietnamese divisions moved through that country. A SOG team was often the only allied force for miles, and if one of them died out there, or worse, was captured, he became living proof that America was lying to the world. That single problem is the key to everything. because it meant these men could carry nothing that pointed back to the United States. There is a word SOG men used for this: sterile. A recon team going across the border went sterile from the skin out. No dog tags, no ID cards, no letters from home, no wallet, nothing. Their uniforms carried no name, no rank, no unit insignia. Sometimes they wore unmarked fatigues. Sometimes they wore uniforms cut in enemy style. This is documented by the man who has become the definitive historian of SOG, John L. Plaster. And Plaster is not a distant academic. He served on these teams. He ran missions across the fence himself. Plaster's account is blunt. To support deniability, recon teams were required to go sterile, meaning no identification, non-standard uniforms, and unattributable arms. And there it is, unattributable arms. The weapons had to be sterile too. Think about what that rules out. It rules out the standard American M16, because an M16 in enemy hands was a receipt. It said, an American was here. So SOG needed guns that told no story, guns that could belong to anyone. And that requirement, not taste, not trophies, is the reason the armory looked the way it did. Picture the worst case the planners were picturing. A team is ambushed. A man goes down and cannot be recovered. The enemy walks up and finds his body. Now imagine what that body says. If everything on it is American, from the rifle to the boots to a tag around his neck, then Hanoi has handed the world undeniable proof that the United States is fighting in a country it swears it never entered. That is a diplomatic disaster waiting in the leaf litter. But if that same weapon is Swedish or Soviet or a leftover from a war 2 decades gone, the proof evaporates. It could have come from anywhere. It could have been captured, traded, scavenged. The gun stops being evidence. That is the entire idea, reduced to a single object in the dirt. So what did they actually carry? This is where the myth falls apart, because the answer is not Nazi weapons. The answer is far stranger and far smarter. First came the Swedish K, a submachine gun made in Sweden with a pale green finish and a folding stock. Why Swedish? Because it was foreign, untraceable, and it came in through the CIA. Its origin pointed nowhere near Washington. SOG especially prized the versions fitted with a suppressor for killing quietly. Then teams upgunned to the enemy's own rifle, the AK-47. And this is genius, honestly. Carrying an AK gave them 3 advantages at once. 1, deniability, because it was a communist weapon. 2, ammunition. If they ran low, they could reload from a dead enemy's magazines. And 3, sound. In a sudden jungle firefight, an AK sounds like the enemy. So when a SOG point man opened up with one, the North Vietnamese nearby could not immediately tell friend from foe. That confusion bought seconds, and seconds kept these men alive. They even took the Soviet RPD machine gun and rebuilt it. Special Forces armorers sawed off the barrel and the stock until the whole weapon was shorter than a Thompson submachine gun, cut its weight down, expanded its ammunition belt, and even slipped a strip of linoleum into the drum so it would not rattle and give the team away. According to Plaster, that chopped down RPD, firing the enemy's own full-power round, was the single deadliest weapon SOG carried. And for the quietest work of all, snatching a prisoner alive, or silencing a sentry before he could shout, they reached back into a spy's toolbox. Suppressed grease guns, British Sten guns left over from the last war, a silenced point .22 caliber pistol first designed for the secret agents of World War II. Some of these tools were older than the men holding them, but every one of them shared that same quality. Pick it up off a dead body, and it points to no one. And yes, somewhere in that mix, occasionally, a genuinely German gun. But here's the part the rumor gets completely backwards. The German weapons were rare. They were not standard issue. They were the exception, carried now and then by individual veterans of World War II who wanted a familiar gun from their youth. Plaster documents one such man, a World War II veteran who wanted a German submachine gun, and SOG simply got him one. It was allowed precisely because a decades-old German gun was, like everything else, deniable. So the Nazi weapons story has a kernel of truth buried inside a pile of nonsense. A handful of old German guns, real. Museum raids and trophy hunting, invented. The actual reason was always the same cold logic. Nothing traceable to America. And where did all this strange, foreign hardware come from? Not a museum. A secret supply operation on the island of Okinawa called the Counterinsurgency Support Office. It was run by a World War II veteran named Conrad Baker, a man the operators nicknamed SOG's Q, after the gadget master in the James Bond films. Baker's own philosophy said everything. There was no order to buy American. The only job was to get his men whatever they needed to survive, wherever it came from. That office, working hand in hand with the CIA, is what kept the sterile guns flowing to the teams. Now listen to a man who was actually there describe how that supply system reached him.
We had our own supply system. CISO was based out of Okinawa. And early on, they were set up so any supplies that went to 5th Special Forces Group and SOG, sometimes things would go to the agency for weapons that they needed them. And they developed what was called a SOG knife. And when I went through my in-processing with S4, got the web gear and everything, I got my SOG knife. And so we always carried that right on the web gear on the shoulder straps, had the SOG knife right there. So that's where the SOG knife would go, CAR-15, magazine pouches, hand grenades. We always had to take a mask, a gas mask with us.
So let's go back to that question from Washington. And let's be precise about it, because precision is the whole point of this channel. It would be easy to say a single committee in Washington sat down and chose these exact guns. That is not quite what happened, and the real answer is more interesting. Washington set the rule. The requirement for total deniability came from the top, from the Joint Chiefs, shaped by the political fiction that Laos and Cambodia were neutral ground America had never touched. That policy is what made sterile weapons mandatory in the first place. But the actual choice of which gun went to which man was pushed downward. The CIA and that supply office on Okinawa procured whatever sterile hardware they could get. And then the team leader, the man whose life depended on it, armed his people as he saw fit for each mission. So the cold open was right about the thing that matters. Men in Washington really had thought carefully about what happens when a weapon is pulled from a dead American's hands. Their answer was a rule: carry nothing that can be traced home. The specific guns that answered that rule were chosen closer to the ground. And that distinction, policy versus practice, is exactly what the lazy version of this story always gets wrong. Now here is the detail that proves the whole thing. If SOG carried foreign guns because they loved them or collected them, they would have kept carrying them for the entire war. They did not. By around 1967, so many American M16s had been captured in Vietnam that an American rifle in enemy country no longer proved anything. A captured M16 could have come from anywhere. It had stopped being a receipt, and the moment the American rifle stopped being traceable proof, SOG's need for foreign weapons began to fall away. The deniability requirement was relaxed, first for Laos and later for Cambodia. And what did the team switch to? The CAR-15, a cut-down American M16. It became the signature weapon of SOG recon for the rest of the war. Sit with that for a second. The instant the guns no longer needed to be untraceable, the men went straight back to American hardware. That is the proof. If it had ever been about taste or trophies, nothing would have changed in 1967. Everything changed in 1967. It was never about the guns themselves. It was about the story a gun tells when it is found in the wrong place. And once that story stopped being dangerous, the strange arsenal quietly disappeared. If you want one more piece of evidence for how deep this mindset ran, consider what SOG did with the enemy's ammunition. In an operation later known as Eldest Son, they took captured enemy rounds, secretly rigged some of them to explode when fired, and slipped them back into the enemy's own supply chain. The goal was to make North Vietnamese soldiers distrust their own bullets. It only worked because SOG understood, better than anyone, exactly how weapons and ammunition move through a war. These were not men playing dress-up with old guns. They were running one of the most sophisticated deception campaigns of the entire conflict. The men of MACV-SOG fought a war their own government swore was not happening. They crossed into countries that were officially off-limits. And they did it stripped of every marker of who they were, down to the guns in their hands. Think about the loneliness of that. If you died out there, you did not just lose your life. You lost your name. There would be no proof you had ever been sent. The sterile weapon in your hands was the final layer of a disguise designed so your own country could deny you. And a great many of them did die out there. This was some of the most dangerous work of the entire war. According to Plaster's history, SOG lost 243 Green Berets. 10 of its recon teams vanished without a trace, and another 14 were overrun. Yet these same teams caused so much chaos behind enemy lines that the North Vietnamese pulled an estimated 50,000 troops off the battlefield just to guard their rear areas against them. And the men who survived came home to a country that, for years, was not even allowed to know where they had been. Their war stayed classified for decades. It was not until 2001 that SOG finally received the Presidential Unit Citation for missions the government had spent a generation denying. That is the real reason behind the myth. Not museum raids, not trophies, not because anyone thought a German submachine gun looked cool. It was a cold, deliberate calculation about deniability, made because these men were sent to do the impossible in places they were never supposed to be. So the next time you see a video claiming SOG carried Nazi guns for the thrill of it, you will know better. You will know the truth is quieter and heavier. These were the most traceless soldiers America ever sent to war. And the weapons they carried were chosen so that, if the worst happened, the United States could look the world in the eye and say a single word: nothing. So now you know the real story. That sterile doctrine that stripped these men of their identity. The 3 reasons a SOG team carried the enemy's own rifle, and the single detail, the switch to the CAR-15 that proves it was about deniability all along. If you want to go deeper into the secret war these men fought across the fence, watch this next. It is the story of the missions Washington still barely admits happened,